today, another episode of LindSak in Conversations with. John, I know you're the director. We've known each other for a while, director of Workforce Development Consultancy. Christopher, risk and performance specialist as well. So really pleased and happy to have you guys on board and have this opportunity to have a conversation. So I suppose before we kick off, guys, for anyone who doesn't know Workforce Development Consultancy, who are you and what do you guys do?
Okay, well, we formed the company about just over 20 years ago now. That was really in response to changes to what was then the LSC and a change in the way in which compliance and the operational side worked from central government. There were a variety of regions that the LSC worked from, and it was very difficult for particularly large employers at the time to have a uniformed approach, both to seeking funding, but also to finding a solution that gave them a continuity of operational planning, of quality, etc. And that's really what started the company off. Over the last 20 years, as we all know, we have seen a significant change in the way that central government operate. The LSC obviously became the SFA. It then merged with the EFA to become the ESFA. And we've seen, of course, a huge amount of change in the type of qualifications that are funded, the change in apprenticeships, the change in funding models, compliance requirements, and so on and so forth. So what we've done as a business is adapt to the changes, follow the changes, and make sure that today we can offer a solution for clients which is varied and it covers the key areas that I think most training providers look for. And if you can capture that in 3 words, I would say that our service enables training providers, or for us to provide to them, something which offers growth, compliance, and resilience. And those are the main factors behind everything that we do.
I suppose, John, you must have seen quite a lot of changes over the last 20 years.
Oh, I have seen lots of changes. The problem is when I talk to people about Schedule 2D funding, distance learning and perpetual audits that we used to get, then it reminds me how old I am. That seems a long, long time ago now. But yeah, things have changed. You know, people arguably don't like change, but change is inevitable. Yeah. You know, many of the changes fundamentally have been for the good, but I think they have put added pressure on providers. I think the requirements, the needs, and particularly the overall compliance and due diligence requirements now that are expected, the components within an apprenticeship not framework anymore, but the apprenticeship standards have changed. And I think it is a lot more difficult now for training providers to be able to go about their business, providing that particular service, whatever it may be, and be able to get all their ducks in a row and know that they are exactly where they need to be in a compliant way, offering the right kind of service, and that they are pulling in the right amount of data and evidence that will ensure that any external, either external audit or inspection is going to pass muster, really. And I think that's where the challenges for many people have been. And what we've done with our service is do just that and try to adapt to the needs and the changes of all of that. But yes, many changes, and no doubt we will see many more.
And Christopher, where do you fit into this, into WDC?
So for the past 15 years, I've been involved in enterprise risk management, both in the public sector and the private sector. So I've been dealing with risk and performance management, and it's enterprise risk management that I deal with mainly, rather than health and safety risk management. And since coming into Workforce Development Consultancy, I've been heavily involved in the social values aspect, which is a new thing coming to funding provision, which is a requirement if you're going to win a bid.
Which is fair. And I suppose, I know John and Christopher, we've both been talking about your retainer model, and I've seen that on LindSak, and it's, from the feedback that I've had from people who've seen it, seems positive. For anyone who hasn't seen it on LindSak yet, what is your retainer model? And can you just tell us a little bit more about how it works?
Sure. The retainer model is something that we came up with because, again, as I said earlier, there is so much requirement now on training providers, right? They're looking for growth. They're looking for where the new opportunities are. They're looking for how to try and manage the service provision that they have, but also look for where new opportunities through some of the government initiatives might lie. At the same time, they are trying to be as compliant as they can, making sure that their end-to-end model is appropriate, whilst making sure that all the returns from their delivery teams through their MIS and their data management is accurate, that their data management uploads are accurate to ensure that the funding they expect to receive is what they receive. Yeah. And on top of that, have they got all their policies, procedures, and all the other operational things in place? Fundamentally, what we came up with is looking at those range of specialisms that a training provider needs to have either in-house or buy-in from external provision, and put that together in a, as we've recorded, the retainer model, which enables us to use a range of specialists within the business, obviously Christopher being one of them. We have a couple of people who are absolute specialists within the funding, ILR, data management side of it. We have other experts who are matrix based and everything else. So between that, what we've done is come up with a model that over 12 months gives providers that specialism access for us to go in, to look at their business, look at the model, check data, check ILRs, check that they're getting the funding from the ESFA that they should have, and making sure that any gaps in perhaps areas where they ought to be managing under the performance management rules a little bit more effectively, we can identify the gaps and plug those gaps with some specialism that just makes sure that they keep all of that evidence and that audit control in place. I mean, just as an example of that, if we take the funding side of it alone, I can't obviously say who's who, but there were just 3 clients that last year, Reese, who is one of our specialists in that area, he identified across 3 clients £197,000 of potentially lost funding because of data inaccuracy. Now, putting together a retainer model both makes a service that we offer covering all of those areas are very, very cost effective. And certainly for many providers, because it doesn't matter how big you are as a provider, the same compliance, the same rules, the same performance management applies. And what you really need is to have those specialisms covered. And there are very few providers can ultimately afford to have a Reese and a Christopher and the other guys involved in their business full time. So we've offered something which is an external check, an external assessment of where they are, what they're doing, but also bringing into that, keeping them updated with the latest ESFA funding rules, making sure that they don't miss out on any updates, and particularly as we're constantly looking for where new opportunities, new bidding might be, that we're alerting those to those opportunities. So they're not just getting that compliance side of it, but they're also getting opportunities to look at where they can grow as well. So that's essentially what the model does.
John, I think the 2 things there that I find really interesting is, one, I think often wrongfully, most definitely, but compliance, audits, paperwork is often seen as we have to do in order to do what we do as a business. But actually, we've mentioned that £197,000. That's a direct impact on your bottom line, isn't it? If you're not doing it correctly. I think the other thing that you said I found really interesting is actually it doesn't really, by the sounds of it, doesn't matter what size business you are. Your retainer model can be all encompassing for a smaller provider who needs to learn the ropes from a compliance perspective, but then also for a larger provider as that sounding board, that checks and balance. I suppose the other bit that you've mentioned a couple of times is around risk management. And I suppose being as we're a government funded sector, you've got that added layer of complexity. It's not just business risk management, but being a trained provider or a college, the risk management around funding compliance. I mean, how do you support businesses with that?
Well, I'll just come in before, obviously this is Christopher's bag, but you know, one of the reasons for Christopher coming and joining the business is because this is an area that's woefully lacking in the sector in many areas. And now I better shut up because it is entirely Christopher's domain.
So, I mean, when people discuss risk management, the first thing they usually think of is health and safety. How do I pick up boxes without breaking my back? That sort of thing. And yeah, that is an important thing to kind of consider, but it is not the whole of risk management. Enterprise risk management looks at your business, and what it looks at is the potential barriers for you being able to deliver your service provision. And there are more out there than you'd probably think. So as a risk management, enterprise risk management kind of system, you have to look at the consequences should those potential barriers occur, these potential risks. And the consequences, you always have to think of the worst case scenario when you're looking at them, because if you don't, how could you possibly prepare for them? And a good example of that is the recent pandemic, which none of us could really have expected or anticipated, but it should be going onto everybody's risk registers now. And one of the worst things that can happen with this pandemic is sadly death. And, you know, you always have to have that as a consequence of that risk, because, you know, no matter how many vaccines you have and boosters, there's always the potential that it could kill you. And that has a big impact on your business. A loss of tutors, loss of admin staff. So, you know, and that just piles up, and then you get revenue losses, you get closure of your business because you can't staff it. You know, it can just spiral out of control. So to keep a risk from doing that to your business, we have to put control measures in place. And I think when the service that we offer, people will be very surprised when we start going through their risks, how many control measures they've already got in place. So we're talking about the policies, the business policies that you have, procedures that you've documented. All of these things go to mitigating the likelihood of these risks impacting your business in a severe and damaging way. So, I mean, I've worked, as I said to you previously, I've worked in the public sector and the private sector on risk management, and I've seen how businesses firefight risk, and they only really consider risks after the risks actually occur. So the one thing that we look at when we create the risk registers, which is just a register that would house the risks to your business, is we look at the key risks to your business, the ones that are actually relevant, and we're proactive by using our risk library to kind of say, well, have you considered all of these steps to stop this risk from either A, occurring, or B, impacting your business too badly?
And you know, Christoph, it's interesting that, because you're 100% right. You know, a lot of organizations, they have the policies in place and actually they're experts retrospectively. But it's having those control measures and implementing them into business as usual. So it's not panic and then reflect. John, just back to you for a second. I know from old, and you know, I'm in a fortunate position that I've known you for years, but am I thinking you guys also offer bid writing services? And if so, with the amount of provision, kind of anything that provider should consider?
I think the thing about bid writing, it's quite interesting because there's two ways that I've noticed people look at that. There are organizations out there, training providers, who look for a bid writing service that is essentially they can almost abdicate their responsibility to, and say, come up with, you know how the words work, you know how to make it impactful, and so on and so forth. Can you just write it for me? And we've been asked to do things like that, you know, and yes, I've written bids where there has been very little input really from the client, but they're not, even those ones which have been successful, they're not really representative of that provider. They might not even reflect everything the provider can end up delivering. So the way we like to work with bid writing is, firstly, and the first thing I'd say to anyone is, don't just follow funding for funding's sake, because there is an opportunity to get £500,000 over there. If that isn't the right £500,000 for your business based on your strategy, if it's not the right thing that you can deliver because you don't have the expertise, then in actual fact, if you go for it and you win it, that actually is causing you a potential risk, as Christopher would say, because you might not actually be able to deliver on that at all, which of course doesn't make your business look very good. So the way we like to work with clients is, yes, we can write the words, we can make sure that they are impactful, that they have got, that they're covering the key parts of whatever that contract performance requires. And importantly, what people often don't look at is what the specification is for these bids, and actually write. And I've seen so many answers that people have written and said, can you look at these for me? And I say, you haven't even read the specification for this. You've not answered the questions that they've asked. You've not referred to any previous data. You've not referred to any of your end-to-end links. So we like to work, if you like, in partnership, for a better term, with clients to make sure that our expertise in knowing how to frame a bid is written with a provider because it's based on their business. It is always their bid at the end of the day. And I think that's what's really important. You know, my process, the first thing I do is I look at the provider, talk to them, look at the specification, identify all of the elements of a specification that needs to be answered, and say, can you meet all of those? Because if you can't, actually, is it really worth writing the bid? And it's very much, for me, the fact that people shouldn't just look at these opportunities, of which there are more and more all the time, but you know, let's make sure that it is reflection on the strategy that you want to follow for your business. That's not meaning to say that you should be a one-trick pony and you shouldn't look for new initiatives and new growth, but let's look at what that means. And have you got the ability to grow and to deliver a new type of service? And that, to me, is what's really keen about this. The other thing I would say, Sak, is people are often, and I think many bid writers would say this, is that clients aren't always aware of the windows that these bids are opening. Quite often, because of various legislation, you know, you get 4 to 6 weeks and that's it. And there's an awful lot of work to do sometimes in some of these, particularly with some from combined authorities, the GLA as well. West Midlands Combined Authority is a classic. You know, they want a lot of stuff. They want project plans. They want all sorts of things. And you know, when you need information from a client to enable you to put that together and to assemble it, you can't do that in 2 weeks. So people really need to be very mindful about what the timings are and to get the right kind of information. Because a bid writer can only do a certain amount of work based on what they've got. And there was one thing that is the most compelling of all to win a bid, and that is your track record and the evidencing that you can do about data management, what you've achieved in the past. And that speaks volumes in many ways in any bid. And those are the key things I would say people should be aware of.
I think, you know, what's interesting there is, again, just touching on what you mentioned around data, with that retainer model, it is almost full 360, because as you understand the provider through numbers, through track record, I suppose, like you said as well, the more you get to work with a provider collaboratively, you're able to add that element of authenticity, that actually it's not an off-the-shelf bid that I would have written for anybody. It's no, this is your business, the impact you will make for whatever it is for the provider. And John, I know when we met last actually in person, the apprenticeship conference, we were talking a little bit about the sector, the opportunities, and just to touch upon again what you mentioned around the new bids that are around, and there is a fine line, I agree, between diversification and distraction. What do you think the sector looks like? What are the new opportunities out there?
I think the sector's quite exciting at the moment, to be honest. You know, it's frustrating for many people because there's many challenges in it, and there's no point in pretending there's not. But I think, you know, we've seen a lot of interesting government initiatives. You know, I think boot camps has been something that's been new. It seems to be working very well. Obviously, they applied it to the HGVs with the problem we know we have in logistics and a massive, you know, lack of HGV drivers. There is certainly talk at the moment in government about boot camps extending into other areas where we see, you know, a massive gap in where we have a skill set in the UK of people who can take those jobs. So I think boot camps, just for one example, is something that will grow. And I think that's something quite exciting for providers to look at. You know, we've just done a significant bid for a client for digital boot camps. In actual fact,
Nice.
we've done 7 bids for boot camps, and we won 6 out of 7, which I don't think is too bad a kind of
It's very
scenario.
impressive.
Kickstart, I know it's not going to last for much longer, but I think a Kickstart, for those people that became a Kickstart gateway, that was a really interesting idea. You, as obviously a professional recruitment company, will be aware of that and can see where some of the merits were for that one.
Yeah.
I think, looking at traineeships, there is a good, interesting model there, not right for everyone. Although you can argue that, Kickstart and traineeships could almost conflict against each other sometimes, depending on the candidate. But I think between that and between some of the new opportunities that's coming up through the devolved authorities and many of the other kind of grant-funded applications, I think it's a very exciting time. I think the challenge that we all have, whether it's providers or those of us providing services to them, is the amount of time it takes to search for them, understand where they are, how they're going to work, and put together that right kind of application that's going to make that come to fruition for a provider. But I certainly think that we're seeing a huge amount of variance now in ways in which we get to market. We know that the apprenticeship service and the new ROAPs and the refreshers have taken another change in the way in which they're done, but still opportunities around that. So I do think it's an exciting time, but it's not a time that you can still, look at all of these initiatives, if you will, these government initiatives, and say, and throw your hat out to every single one of them, because that just is not a sustainable way of a business working. But I think that if people select them carefully, then there is great growth opportunities for people. But it's about looking at your business and doing what's right for you.
And John, I suppose just on that a little bit, because, and I don't know if you can echo what I find sometimes in the sector, in that when they reach out to consultancies like yourself, it tends to be, close to the 11th, maybe the 10th hour before they do, and they realize actually we need that intervention to come in. What advice would you give to training providers or colleges who haven't quite hit that 10th or 11th hour? Why should they be speaking to you now as opposed to that close to the line?
I think the important thing, what makes things much easier for everyone and much quicker is to get to know somebody, even if there isn't business to be had at the time. Yep. Where we know clients, where we know how they work, right? When opportunities come, we're really well briefed in how to be able to hit the ground running, as it were. Yeah. I think that, it's really important for, and I know clients who have been aware of an opportunity the moment it was released, and it still took them 4 weeks of debating internally before they decide they want to go for it, and give you 2 weeks left to write it. So, it happens. I think it's really, really important. I actually want to bring Christopher in on this as well, because what's been really interesting in many of the recent bid applications is the way that they've looked at, in actual fact, not just risk management, but also Christopher's other kind of other specialism is social values, and those have added a degree of something new and probably not that well known to many providers. So that again has taken time to add in, but those make a big impact on any bid. And Christopher, do you just want to say perhaps a little bit about, how we've seen some of those kind of develop?
Yeah, so there's social values is the big thing that's coming out now, and pretty much every bid that we've been asked to write has had social value aspects in them. Obviously, the social values portal team with the National TOMS calculator are the main social values experts there, and I've been liaising quite with them, and we'll be working quite closely in the future with them as well to develop kind of an awareness of social values out there in the sector. But they are important, and you can win or lose bids on your social value method statement. In fact, we were working with a client, and they won their bid, and it was in large part thanks to the social method statement we helped them create and the data that we helped upload onto the calculator for them. Oh, but you kind of need to have these, and everyone's got these social, it's just like risks. Everyone's got the control measures for risks. Everyone's got the social values in place in their business. It's just identifying what those social values are and putting them into the method statement and to say, this is how we are creating sustainability in jobs. This is how we are protecting the environment. And the environment is going to become a big thing going forward. So if people don't have anything that helps to sustain our environment, then they're going to find they're going to be losing contracts pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I suppose on that, and guys, to conclude, John, Christopher, if people wanted to get in touch with you about the bid writing, the retainer, the social value piece, how can they get hold of you?
Right. Well, they can go onto the website, which is wdconsultancy.co.uk. On that, on the header page, Christopher's also got a free downloadable assessment tool for people to look at their risk.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, that will give access to us. It's got our phone numbers on it and everything else. That's probably the easiest way. People can always call us on our mobiles. Obviously, we've got connections through LindSak promotions that we use as well, which has been very successful for us. So, you know, but the website is probably the easiest way. You can see what we do. You can connect to us easily on that. There's a chat button on it as well. So that probably is the easiest way for most people to connect with us.
No, brilliant. Well, John, Christopher, genuinely thank you for taking our time to talk to us and LindSak Promotions. And good luck. Sounds like exciting times in the sector.
It is indeed. Thank you very much for your time, Sak, and for inviting us on. It's been really good to be able to perhaps articulate, you know, what we do to a wider audience. So, you know, very much appreciate that and the work that you guys at LindSak Promotions have done for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.